everybody, welcome to the Fire It Up with CJ show. Today we are going to be talking about self-love, and we're going to be talking to Blake Bauer about this book, You Were Not Born to Suffer. So welcome to the show, Blake.
Thank you, CJ.
Yeah, so I wanted to start off by talking about your personal story because in your book, You're Not Born to Suffer, you talk about the initial part of your high school years when you were arrested a couple times for drug possession. You had to resign from being the captain of your football team. Your girlfriend at the time, you ended up breaking up with or cheating on her and then breaking up. And you describe it as kind of a crisis or a loss of self at that time. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that part of your story. I mean, and how long ago was that? How long ago was that?
That was about 14 years ago.
13, 14 years ago. Okay, so now when you look back at that time, if you were able to talk to your younger self at that time, what would you have said now, knowing what you know about self-love? What would you have said to yourself?
Maybe that everything was perfect. No, there are some other things I would say, but what did want to start with is just because we addressed this before, is for the viewers. If I keep looking down and not looking at the camera, it's because of the way our cameras are set up. So for
Right.
me to see CJ, if I don't look directly at the camera, please forgive me. I just wanted to say that so that people know
Yeah.
what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. Thank
Um,
you.
so instead of staring at the camera, I would probably prefer to look at you while we
Okay.
talk, but
All
I'll
right.
do my best.
Okay.
Um, so if I could go back and talk to my 17 or 18-year-old self at that time, I would probably encourage him to reach out for help and to
Mm,
find somebody that he respected and felt safe with, that he could talk about the emotional and psychological struggles that I was having at that time.
mm-hmm.
Um, and I would encourage him not to run from himself or to numb out with drugs and alcohol or to care so much about what other people think or about fitting in or seeking approval or acceptance from his peers.
Mm. So do you see that those were the things that were driving that behavior, is the desire to numb out?
Absolutely. I was stored full of toxic emotional pain and insecurity and fear and anger and sadness from my childhood and earlier teenage years that I had absolutely no clue how to address or articulate or talk about or again ask for help with.
Mm,
And so I was just looking for some relief and some joy and to feel better because I didn't deep down feel good about myself, but I didn't really know what else to do.
mm-hmm.
And my parents were busy struggling with their own life, and so were my teachers trying to stick to their curriculum and help us pass our tests.
Mm-hmm.
And deep down, I, like most people, was struggling with something, and I happened to be struggling with quite a bit.
Yeah. It's hard because don't you find that it's hard to even ask for help, I think. I
It's
mean,
so
especially,
vulnerable.
yeah. I mean, who would you have gone to for help at that time?
I don't even know, to be honest. Um, I had a counselor at school, like a school counselor who
Mm-hmm.
I know was assigned to me because of my parents' divorce. But even with her, if I think back to it, I felt this subtle form of judgment present.
Yeah.
And then I think about too, she probably would have had hundreds of students she was responsible for. So
Yeah.
she would have been quite spread thin. So it's nobody's fault and no one's to blame. It's just what I've discovered to be a huge part of the human condition, is that we're all struggling and, doing our best with a very limited toolbox,
Mm-hmm.
because it's our parents never learned to love themselves and couldn't teach us, and their parents didn't love themselves and couldn't teach them. And if we're parents, because we don't love ourselves, it's hard for us to teach our children to love themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
so this cycle's just been going on for generations, and
Right.
will continue to go on for generations to some degree, until those of us and as those of us who have awoken and learned to love ourselves and understood that that's the key to bringing love into the world and fulfilling our purpose, until we create our life on a daily basis, based on that understanding and then, bring that support to other people, it's going to continue to be a, a thorn or a cause of suffering for years to come.
Mm-hmm.
So personally, I'm doing all I can to share this message with as many people as I can.
Mm-hmm. Well, what would have been a first step? I mean, how would you, because I think that's the hardest thing is to reach out for help, right? To be vulnerable and reach out for help. I mean, how would you have started? Or like even people, like they're reaching out for help from you, right? Like they go to your workshops, of which you have many workshops, all over the country and ones that are actually coming up soon. But how does one reach out? Do they go to a psychotherapist, a counselor, a friend, or like a priest? All of the above, and what do they share about themselves?
CJ, I think if you can ask for help from anybody, it's a great way to start. Anywhere is a good place to start because that's the big leap. That's the
Mm-hmm.
first leap. And if someone doesn't end up being the right person, then you move on,
Right,
and you'll feel that. And if you don't feel understood or supported or that you're moving forward or making the changes that you feel are possible,
right,
then you can always make a new choice every day, even multiple times a day. You can make a new choice. You could see 5 different counselors in one day or healers in one day or go to a healing center, where you see different therapists in one day, or go to a conference where you hear a dozen different speakers speak and then you see what modality or approach resonates most with you. So we have so many options, which is a beautiful thing about the
yeah,
time we live in, and the internet and technology. The fact that your listeners can find support through your guests and our conversations is a perfect example.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
to listen to a bunch of YouTubes and see, what's so interesting? It's reminding me. I talked to this one guy. He's a dating expert, and I said, what's your one piece of dating and advice? And he said, just ask a lot of girls on dates. It just doesn't matter. Don't take it personally. Don't, just keep on asking, keep on asking, keep on asking, keep on asking those girls out on dates, and don't take it personally. Don't try to analyze it too much. Just keep on going, and just out of the law of numbers, he
right.
said, you'll eventually find something. And so it's very similar to the approach that you're talking about. It's like just keep on trying. It's the process of trying itself and kind of I think actually, even in the process that you're describing, as you're meeting other people, you meet the acupuncturist, you meet the Reiki person, you meet the herbalist, you meet whatever, you're going to find like what feels right for you. And that in itself is a process of self discovery, right? It's discovering what you need and who you are through that whole process, which I think is hard to do because oftentimes people reach out to the first person, it doesn't work, and they're like, ah, forget about it.
Right, just like dating.
Right.
Right.
But I do think it is just like you just try a bunch. You have to ask. It's like you have to ask a lot. And then you think, oh, well, that's just a waste of time. But it's not because each time you meet someone, you're like, oh, no, I don't respond to that kind of body work because, but you're understanding about yourself through each person that you meet, I think. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Yes, absolutely. I think you're getting in touch with your intuition, your instinct, and then you're learning to trust yourself again
yeah.
and have the confidence to trust your feelings and your thoughts and your intuition about your experience. And then for me, the process of creating and finding and experiencing what I want is very much connected to experiencing what I don't want. So
Right.
that's how we, navigate the fork in the road that each moment presents, which is this feels good, this relationship feels good, this therapy feels good, this work feels good, this way of taking care of my body, this exercise feels good, or this doesn't.
Right.
And if this doesn't, then I know, okay, well, at least I've tried.
Right.
I'm not leaving this rock unturned or saying I've never experienced it. And I'm not curious and regretting that I never tried it. And
Right.
then I get to go and no, leave that. That's at peace. I can leave that door closed and move forward.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Okay,
yeah.
so you actually went through, so it sounds like you went to college and you tried yet a different path, right? You talk about in the book, you went to college and you took the classes that you thought was going to make you wealthy and make your parents happy and all of that. And then it sounds like you hit like you went down a path, right? Like you had all these different paths presented to you in life. You went down kind of, I think, the most common path that we're all told to go down. And then you hit a point where you're like, wait a second. So what I want to do is hit that wait a second point where you thought, wait a second. Can you recall that time or what happened to you when you reach that point of like, what am I doing here?
Well, it was really a period of like I would say 2 years because it
Mm-hmm.
was when I was 18 and I was going off to college,
Right.
and by that time I had created so much pain and drama for myself and was so self-destructive. So I had no clue who I was or what I wanted to do with my life.
Ah.
I applied to 3 universities because that's kind of how we were all encouraged to apply, was to apply to at least three. I applied to 3 universities, got into 3 universities, chose the one that felt the best, went there studying business and advertising, finance and advertising,
Mm-hmm.
because I had no clue. I just thought I had to make money to survive, and that was the only
Mm.
template I had at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I had no clue what to do with myself, and but during that time, I was suffering very deeply, psychologically and emotionally. So throughout that whole time, I was
Mm.
questioning, why am I doing this? What am I doing? But it was like there was this momentum of my own conditioning, and then um, feeling almost powerless to the social expectations of what my friends were doing, and feeling
Mm.
powerless to the expectations of my parents and the educational system that I was in and coming out of.
Right.
And so I felt like I was just in this river flowing, that I had to just go forward, on this path because it's what everybody else was doing.
Right.
But inside of me, something felt off because
Right.
I wasn't clear. And so I thought, am I wasting money? Am I wasting time? So I had all this
Mm.
self-doubt
Mm.
and confusion, which was present the entire time. So from the last year
Mm.
of high school,
Mm-hmm.
going to college, and then after pushing away everyone and everything that I cared about, and my entire identity and ego structure crumbled, which is where I talk about, I went from being so arrogant and thinking I was invincible to being so insecure and so lost and so confused and so paranoid. The last part of my identity when I was around 18 was through sports and through the gym, through my
Mm-hmm.
body. So I was
Mm-hmm.
very identified with my physical body at that
Mm-hmm.
time still.
Mm-hmm.
So I would go to the gym a lot and work out. And that was a big part of my ego and my pride,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like the shell, all the armor I had built up around my broken heart and
Wow.
my hurting heart. And I never used to focus on my core or my abs because obviously that's where all our repressed emotion.
Literally, you actually did not focus on that part of your body, the core. Wow, that's
In
fascinating.
retrospect, it was really fascinating to observe. So
Yes.
I was, I had a very big ego to protect me from pain. So I would squat and do my legs, and I would do my chest and my arms. So all vanity. And I was avoiding my core because I later realized to actually work on your core and develop core strength, you actually have to process all the emotions that are stored
Wow, that's fascinating.
subconsciously in that part of the body. So one day I'm in the
Wow.
gym and I completely herniate 2 discs in my back, and I drop to the ground, and I couldn't walk, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't go to the bathroom, I couldn't go in the shower. Like every movement was painful and it was horrible. So my psychological and emotional torture then manifested in physical torture and stopped me,
Wow.
brilliantly stopped me, even more so from a path that wasn't healthy for me or right for me.
Right.
And so that then brought me to acupuncture, and then I started practicing yoga every day. So when I was 18, I started practicing
Wow.
hot yoga every day, and it
Yeah, yeah.
really opened me up. But then I was still waking up very anxious
Mm-hmm.
and just tortured by hundreds of thoughts. When you wake up in the morning and you just have all these thoughts,
Right.
and that's even if you are on path and living your purpose, you still have all these
Yes,
thoughts.
it doesn't go away.
But so when you're confused and lost completely and have no sense of self and no center, so I was waking up just so tortured in my mind, wanting to run away from myself constantly. I'd wake up, be anxious, restless, confused, spread thin, have no clue where to go, what to do, but I didn't want to be with myself, so I would just run. But then I didn't know where I was running to.
Like
So
literally run or just run through taking drugs or like run
no,
away?
I had stopped doing
Okay.
drugs by that time and stopped drinking actually. So it'd be more like get up in this panic mode,
Mm.
get dressed, want to get out of the house, go somewhere, even if
Mm.
I had no reason or clarity around why. Uh,
I'm
you know,
laughing because it sounds familiar. I think I did the same thing, but I couldn't evaluate it in that frame until now. Yeah, you're running away from your life.
yeah,
Running away. You don't even want to be home
yeah.
because you're just running away.
I didn't feel at home with myself at
Right.
all. You know. I read a book while I was in school for acupuncture that said all sickness is homesickness. That
Oh,
that I really love and I believe is the truth. Uh,
yeah. But that is just such a like mind-blowing metaphor, right? We don't want to be home because I had a period when I was working like a bajillion hours and I was never at home. I was like going to see friends, I was going to do that. It's a different form of running away from going inside. You're just running outside in all different directions, trying to find yourself, where really yourself is at home, but you don't want to stay there because it feels uncomfortable. So I totally get that. And until this moment, I never even saw my life in that way, but it was totally exactly that. It's interesting. Okay, so
so that
you
was all going on.
yeah.
So when you were asking when was that moment? So
Yeah.
it's like, I guess the as I learned to meditate and I practiced yoga and I got to know myself better and became more comfortable in myself, I started to cultivate the strength and the capacity to make the choice, to make decisions, clear decisions from an inner center and an inner knowing. So my confusion kept building, my frustration kept building, but I began to practice meditation and really come back to myself. And then eventually it was like, okay, I'm wasting my time. This is not where I want to be. This is not what I want to be doing. And the other thing that was relevant for me is that in high school, I was doing a lot of drugs. I was drinking, I was
Mm,
partying. All I cared about was my social life and drugs and having
mm,
fun or really running away.
mm.
So I never cared about school. And I did well in school because I was smart enough to get by and I cheated. I'd
Right.
like stuff in my calculator or
Right.
I was never a bad person. I'm just being honest because
Right.
we all have done
Right.
things that
We've
we're
all cheated at
ashamed
one
to
point or another.
we're ashamed to admit, that we looked at someone's test or we put something wrote
Right.
something on our hand or
Yes.
whatever it was, and so I was smart enough to get by without actually doing the work.
Right.
And so then when I went to college, because I stopped drinking, stopped smoking, and isolated myself completely from my peers, I became very diligent about studying. And so I was getting straight A's. I was getting a 4.0 studying things like accounting and statistics. And I'm like, this is not what life is about. This is not what my life, this is empty. This
Right.
is, I gave everything I had to it. And I'm like, no. So because I gave everything I had to it, I was able to get to a clear no. It's kind of like
Ah.
you're in a relationship or a marriage. If you don't work through the issues or try, you'll never get to the
Right.
clear
Is it just
no.
that I don't like it, or is it something? Yeah, you have to kind of go all the way to the end until you're like, I know. My husband said that there was this woman once where he was afraid that he couldn't be in a relationship, so he dated this woman despite she was did all these awful things to him, but he kept on loving her, kept on loving her, kept on loving her, just to know that regardless of what someone does, you can still love it and still love that person and still be there to know that you can do it. And then like, and I've done it, and I'm not going to do that ever again. But
Right.
almost you have to go through that process of just knowing that you can do it, and then at the end you'll know, well, no, it's this thing, it's not me, it's just that I know that I don't want to do accounting or finance or any of those things. So is that the point that you hit? They're like, I just
Do
can't
you-
do this, or what happened?
I started my second year, I started taking philosophy classes
Ah,
along with my business classes.
yeah.
And I got to the point where, philosophy was just kind of so mind-blowing. And I turned in a final exam and I printed out some bizarre logical explanation of why I was doing this. And I taped this typed out um, piece of work or an essay onto a can of cake icing. And it was a philosophy class. And I said and I wrote, being in this class has helped me realize that I need to leave school, and this is icing on the cake. And I taped it to a can of icing, and I got a B on it. And I left school, and I
Oh
left.
my
That was the, so so it worked. It seemed to work. My professor wasn't completely, offended or disrespected by it. He actually appreciated it. And I said,
yeah.
I'm leaving school now. And so I after my first university, I did end up going to four more universities.
Wow.
I never graduated. Then I built a very successful private practice, and then my book became a bestseller and a number one best-selling title in Australia where I was living. So yeah, so it was a long, interesting ride. So there were just these series of
Right, and
moments.
you never really have graduated because I have a feeling that you probably are still learning, right? Are you still reading a ton and still doing stuff?
No, I don't. No, no. I mean, I
No?
learn every day. Everybody is my teacher.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
I just left Australia. I was
Mm.
living in Australia for 6.5 years, and I just left a private practice with over 500 people on my wait list.
Wow. Okay, what
So
prompted that? That's a gigantic transition.
it's huge. There's so many dynamics. So I was in a relationship for 6.5 years,
Right.
and both my partner and I were having struggles, for the
Mm-hmm.
last few years. And then my parents are in Chicago and they're
Mm-hmm.
both sick.
Ooh.
So I was starting to feel this huge tear between the relationship and my family. And then my book was doing very well. And I recently sold my book to a large publisher, and we're going to be launching it in the US and the UK. So there was this demand from life for me to be in the US and the UK more. Both my parents were sick, and my mother was very sick. My brother passed away from
Oh,
a
I'm
hair.
sorry. Oh,
Yes, thank you. From a heroin overdose 2.5 years ago. And
wow.
after that, my mother got very sick.
Oh, wow.
And then my stepfather, who was raised me as my father, he's not doing well either. So there was just these huge, uh,
Universal pull.
it
It's like
was
signals from
huge.
the universe, right? You got to go.
Yeah, so that's what pushed the change. And
Wow.
interesting, it goes back to something you were saying earlier that I wanted to speak to, which is that we all struggle so much with what we're talking about, that there is such a demand and a need for help. And I can't tell you how many people reach out to me. Like I said, the wait list that I left, and I get emails every day. And I feel bad sometimes because I humanly can't keep up with the people that are reaching out for help,
Mm-hmm.
because I believe we're speaking to the core of all of our suffering, to the root cause of all suffering, depression, and disease, which goes back to us never learning how to love ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and rejecting ourselves to please others, to be loved or accepted, and constantly seeking outside of ourselves for love and peace and happiness and
Mm-hmm.
security, and continually destroying ourselves in the process. And because I'm speaking to this core from not a religious standpoint, but from a universal standpoint, there seems to be it's kind of like an infinite need in us as human beings for this.
Mm-hmm.
So I know there was for me. I mean, I was so desperate, and I'm sure you can relate to
Oh,
that
I could completely
that
relate to it.
desperate need, that to find the answers.
Right. Yeah, when I think actually the parts that resonate, there was lots of parts, but the part that um, I think was for me, there's two parts that are still like on my journey of self-love. Um, there's parts that you mentioned like forgiveness and creating boundaries, and those are the kinds of things that I've learned along my path and journey of self-love, and just accepting myself, accepting others, loving others. Like I've gone along, the 30 chapters of your book, and the ones that really are still a problem. And I think the reason why there's so much of a problem is because there's so much cultural conditioning, is the conditional love. And that's the part, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about that, because it seems like, when you're studying all these different things, it's because, you're studying business and finance because that's the way that you will make money, and that way you'll be successful, and then everyone will love you and accept you, right? And I think
Absolutely.
we go through this kind of thing where and I love in the book that you have like examples like, when I lose weight, then I'll love myself. When I do this, then, it's like these conditions that have to arise before you love yourself. And of all the different things for me, this is like the last bit, that and guilt and shame. Those are the two things that I feel are preventing me from full self-love. And I think that they're probably, guilt and shame is my own particular thing, but I think that conditional love is one of those things that really haunts a lot of us. So how did that represent itself in your life?
I would love to talk about this because this is really at the core, and what you described, the guilt and the shame and the conditions,
Yeah.
are all connected.
Yeah.
And I would love to outline this because it'll help all your listeners
Yeah.
so much,
Okay.
because it was the root of my suffering too, and obviously the root of yours. And I would say it's not just particular to you; it's universal, and
Mhm.
I'll explain why. So first of all, I didn't love myself when I began to awaken. and I didn't know how to love myself. So, I carried a lot of shame and guilt and insecurity and inadequacy.
Mm-hmm.
And as a man, it was very hard to talk about my emotions and these things that were going on inside of me. So I would,
Mm-hmm.
use all these different things to try to build up my sense of self that obviously eventually crumbled.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but so I'm going to go back to the beginning. So when we're conceived, our parents are struggling too. If you think back to where your parents are at when you
Mm-hmm.
come into the world, they probably don't know how to love themselves.
Right.
They're probably not financially secure.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably not happy.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably having struggles in their relationship. There's all this stuff coming in. So
Yeah.
then here we come into the world and we're just this innocent little being. And, we are, still very much open and vulnerable and dependent and, need them to take care of us before we can learn to take care of ourselves. But what I noticed is that all of us, to some degree, subconsciously, begin to feel guilty for existing. And the reason why is because our parents are selfish and we're selfish. I actually believe that everybody is selfish. And if you think
Mm-hmm.
about the reason why, and I always use the parent as the ultimate example,
Mm-hmm.
because if you think about we think about the parent and typically the mother, but it's also the father as like the sacrificial archetype, the
Mm-hmm.
martyr archetype. But if you go
Right.
back to why does anybody have children, you'll find that all the reasons why are selfish. So I want to have children. It's my dream to have children. I want to have a family. I want to give my kids what I never had.
Right.
I don't know what else to do. Everybody else is doing it. My body clock is ticking. Or it happens by accident,
Right.
which is often the case.
Right.
I just want to have sex. I want to feel beautiful. I want to have fun. I was
Right.
drunk, whatever. I didn't want to have an abortion. I didn't want to be a sinner. I didn't want to deal with the guilt. I was afraid of what other people would think. All the different reasons. It's always selfish,
Right.
always. And
Yes.
so this is tough for a lot of people to swallow. And it doesn't mean that you're not a good person or you didn't really want to have children, but it's just about being honest with yourself that we're all selfish. And I distinguish between healthy selfishness and unhealthy selfishness, that
Mm-hmm.
there's two types of
Okay.
selfishness. But most of us are so familiar with the unhealthy, self destructive type of selfishness, the worst case of which is narcissism,
Right.
that we don't know that there's this healthy form of selfishness, which is how nature was designed to function optimally. And so we don't know it. So we don't know that it exists. So we just perceive selfishness as negative. So, anyway, so our parents are selfish. It's natural. This being comes into the world, they're stressed.
Wait, can you
We
go back? So the healthy selfishness is what? How you, so
self
unhealthy.
love, learning to
Okay.
love yourself
Okay.
unconditionally, and
Okay.
how.
Got it.
And
Oh, I got
yeah.
it.
So
Thank
being
you.
able to express your emotions
Mm-hmm.
and your needs and your desires without manipulating and without internalizing them and then destroying yourself in the process of not being true to yourself in every moment of every day because you're either scared to or you just don't know how to because you never learned or we never learned.
Okay, so if I had gone back and said, well, when I had a child, I had my clock is ticking. I want to have children. I don't even know why I want to have children. I'm going to have children. I just kind of went through. So that's healthy selfishness, and that's an act of self love. Help me go through that a little
No,
bit.
it's you on your process. It's you on the journey from unhealthy selfishness to healthy selfishness because having children teaches us how to love ourselves
That's for
through
sure.
through birthing the aspect of ourselves out into the world that mirrors back to us everything we do and do not want to see. We're forced to learn
Oh no,
to.
that's mind blowing. I have two kids. I have a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old. And so, really, those are projections. How I raise them are projections of my own self and what I love about myself and don't love about myself.
Well, they're just there, and they're there just to teach you to accept and forgive and be kind and honor yourself and say no, but then also sometimes give of yourself without resenting or expecting something in return.
Yes.
So everything's about learning to love unconditionally.
Right.
And to love unconditionally, we have to learn to love ourselves unconditionally. And children often represent they're our path to that. They're your path to that because you're more vulnerable and open to them than you would be to most other people because of that
Yes.
natural love that you have for them that's different to any other probably type of love you've experienced. But again, going back to the guilt and the shame. So I I see that in myself and in everybody I've ever met, and I think it's the human condition, and the root cause of guilt and insecurity is that we learn first to feel guilty for existing because to some degree we are a burden to our parents. And this is an unspoken truth that is never ever talked about because nobody wants to admit this because they think it makes them a bad person, but it doesn't. It's just the truth because
Right.
the children you have take you away from your selfish needs, and you didn't realize that the children you had came from your selfish needs.
Ah,
And
yes.
so it's enough, right, that we have to put food, like our parents have to put food, water, and shelter. They have to provide physical needs for us, physical support. So it's like a lot of us, and some of us feel totally guilty for existing,
Mm-hmm.
like that we're just a burden. And then we feel that life is a burden, is the result of that. But if we go back, we don't just need food, water, and shelter, right? We also have emotions
Mm-hmm.
and we also have an imagination. So when mom and dad are busy, or for some of us, some of our parents are never there, or one of the parents abandoned ship, or or we were put up for adoption, whatever the dynamic is, when we go to our parents and they're not there, or they're too busy, or they're struggling, and we have these emotions and these needs and this imagination, and we try to learn to process it, but they shut us down
Mm-hmm.
because they're struggling, or they're too busy, or they don't have time or space, or they're not there, we then learn to feel guilty for what we feel. It's like we learn to make ourselves wrong, basically, for feeling what we feel, or needing what we need, or imagining what we imagine, because in order to keep mom or dad's love, or just keep the peace, or not have them react if they're there, we reject our emotions. We learn to make our inner world wrong just to keep that love, or that peace, or what I like to call that crumb of love, that crumb of
Mm-hmm.
attention that we're getting.
Mm-hmm.
And so first we learn to feel guilty for existing, but then we feel guilty for having feelings, and for what we need, and for what we want. And because our parents are struggling, and because they never learned how to love themselves, typically we're only getting a crumb of love,
Mm-hmm.
or a crumb of attention, or a crumb of support. And if we have siblings, we have to share that crumb. Okay. Now,
Yes.
if you and I are brothers and sisters, okay, and mom and dad are only giving us a crumb, if they're even there, then we're going to become very scared of losing that crumb, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to become very competitive about losing that crumb, and we're probably going to become very insecure about upsetting mom or dad because we're not going to get fed, you know,
Right.
with love or attention or support. And typically we're not getting much. And what we are getting is typically toxic, which is
Right.
a whole nother confusing,
Right.
bag of, can of worms. But so what I've noticed is that we learn, all guilt comes from this guilt of
Mm.
feeling that our existence, our mere presence, is a burden, and it's unspoken because most parents would never ever admit that. But
Right.
I know personally that some parents do, and I know how destructive it is for
Yeah, no,
for
I think actually it's first of all, you've just told my life story.
kids.
Sadly, but I think it's and the reason why it's so easy to go there is because it's everyone's life story, right? It's everyone's life story. And for me, I had a cultural tinge on it because my culture is, I'm a first generation Chinese, so both of my parents were immigrants, so they really had no time for a lot of things. Like they're just trying to survive in a foreign land. And so that is one, there's a aspect of it of just the logistics of coming to a foreign land and trying to your whole life was destroyed in communist China to start all over again, right? So there's that. There's this big cultural overlay that you can paint on top of that story because with Chinese, the culture is like you don't exist. You don't. You are noise. Like we don't want to know that you exist, and you're not supposed to have any emotion. So there's like a heavy spackle layer on top of the already cultural, like the U.S. layer has it, and then there's a Chinese layer on top of it. So
Totally.
super super dense, thick stuff that's just layered on top of me. So I can definitely relate to that story, sadly, but I think everyone can,
Absolutely.
right?
And that's why I said it's the root cause of really all our problems. And I wanted to talk about now how it relates to conditional love.
Right.
So So we feel guilty and we feel afraid, insecure of losing crumb as kids. So then we try and meet mom and dad's conditions to please them, to get the crumb, to get the love, to get the attention, to get the support. So if we're a good boy or a good girl, or we keep the peace, or don't say anything to upset them, or do anything to upset them, right? So, and often that entails not being true to ourselves.
Right.
Then we get the conditional love because we've met the condition. If and when you're a good girl or a good boy and you live up to my rules, then you're going to get my love, you're going to get my money, you're going to get my support, you're going to get my quality time. And if you don't live up to those conditions, then you're not going to get the crumb that you were getting and you're going to starve, and that's really painful, and we all don't
Yes.
want to do that. So
Yes.
so so we learn that that is love, that conditional love is love, when deep down we know that that's not true, but that's what we learn here on the earth and in our families, because that's what our parents learned. Like, they love themselves conditionally. They only love themselves if and when they live up to certain expectations that they hold in their own mind, in their own heart, in their own life. And often they're trying to please their spouse or still
Right.
please their parents, and probably please you as their child to, in some
Right.
form.
Right.
And so the cycle continues, so that they love us conditionally because they love themselves conditionally, and then
Right.
they teach us to love ourselves conditionally because that's how they love themselves, and
Right.
thus our
Right.
the other parent. And
Right.
so, but then, so not only do we set in motion this relationship of conditional love for ourselves and expecting conditional love, we're hurting ourselves. So we're building up all this pain. And we learn to live, because we get so hurt in our heart,
Yeah.
like a caterpillar that creates a cocoon to become a butterfly, we create our ego to protect our vulnerable, sensitive soul until one
Mm.
day we're ready to be a free and full expression of who we are. But that often comes years later, and for some people it never comes. So in that process, what we do is we go and we live in our head to avoid getting hurt in our heart. And we live
Oh.
up here, and we live up here thinking, I always have to be more, do more, have more, creating these conditions because we want to avoid being present.
Right.
Because being present has been so painful.
Right, because being present means that I have to feel the pain of not existing, of my emotions not mattering, of the guilt and shame that I've caused as a result of my mere presence in the world.
Yeah, so you could say, like in Buddhist terms, like
Mm-hmm.
the wheel of suffering, like
Mm-hmm.
samsara, that's the wheel. So we're avoiding the pain in our heart. We go up to our mind. We create conditions which keep us running from ourselves, creating more pain to avoid the pain that's already there. So we just keep layering it, layering it, layering it, avoiding the guilt and the shame.
Right.
And then here's the crux.
But then avoiding your heart too, right?
And everything else that you want, you know.
Right.
And that's connected to what we were talking about in the beginning, is that if when we ask for help, when we finally ask for help and our heart is open, we're vulnerable, we can finally receive from life and receive the love or the support that we've never got. But we're so afraid of opening our heart because there's so much pain there, and
Right.
we've been hurt so much in the past, we don't want to get hurt again. So there's all those dynamics going on.
Right.
And so then what I've realized is that every time we're not true to ourselves in the present moment, we hurt ourselves, and we feel guilty and ashamed of the fact that we couldn't find the courage in the moment to be true to ourselves.
Oh. Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So it's like I became the victim of my fear. I let my fear guide me, and I'm ashamed of it. And I feel guilty. You know why? Because I lied to you. I lied to myself, and I lied to you because I was scared.
Okay, so I actually had a meditation retreat, and this is like a really intense meditation retreat. They were doing this stuff to open your pineal gland. Anyways, we were going through this, and I had actually been working up through these meditations to the point that actually my body was shaking because I had so much energy running through me. Like, if I start doing it, I'll activate it, so I'm not going to do it. I was breathing, like hyperventilating, and like my body was shaking, and my arms were flailing. I mean, it was
Wow.
insane because there's so much energy. I can't move my hands because I'll get activated, but there's so much energy running through my body. And I'm in this retreat where it's a retreat with 500 other people, and
Wow.
they're all trying to reach this point of, like, activating their pineal gland so that they can actually commune with the divine, or something greater than themselves, or the unknown, whatever you want to call it, God. I don't know what you want to call it, but this is my intention. I wanted it badly. I'm working like crazy. I had the first meditation I did, and I could feel the like with my breathing, and then I thought, oh no, I'm feeling guilty because I'm interrupting everyone else's opportunity to also reach a state of enlightenment. So, like, why is my state of enlightenment more important? So I was trying to cover my mouth, and I was like trying to do things to prevent this thing that wanted to manifest. And the second time, it kind of got that way, and then my body started shaking because there was so much energy, and I was tapping it down. And the third time, I said to the people around me, hey, I'm going to let it rip because I can't do anything else. But there was so much guilt and shame in that whole process. And there was part of me
Mm.
that thought, well, I really want to do this because that's why I'm here. I'm here to commune with the divine. But then I'm also feel bad because there are other people around me. And I know my flipping and breathing and doing all this other stuff is very disturbing to them. And I
Right.
want them to be, have their moment of convening with the divine too. And so it reach a guilt and shame, but I don't know if it's healthy guilt or shame or not, right? Because there's a point in which that self love becomes indulgent. So I wanted to just ask about that a little bit too.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I'd say think about a child, let's say there was a child at the meditation retreat, right?
Right.
And let's say it was your child,
Right.
and they were having an experience and they were emotional, right? As the parent, right, you tend to feel like guilty and ashamed that you're, bugging everybody else. And
Right.
that's just a mirror for what we all felt as kids. So I would
Right.
that was a huge release for you. And at the
Right.
end of the day, practitioners around you, if they judge you or they react, right, that's their responsibility,
I
right?
know, but at the same time, they're
That's
there
just
for
as
that
much
thing.
God,
Yeah.
right? But you're mirroring back to them something that's deep. I mean, in the spiritual world, we use spiritual practice to numb out quite a bit. I love John Wellwood. He talks about a concept called spiritual bypassing. And it's when you use meditation or spiritual practice to numb out, to numb your emotions. Because a lot
Oh,
of us on the spiritual path, you can practice meditation for years and you have this real clear sixth chakra and you're real connected to the divine. But meanwhile, you've got all this repressed shame and guilt and insecurity and fear because it is very hard to deal with and it's
right.
very vulnerable to
Right.
deal with. So, in my experience, though, as you face those emotions and you truly process them, and if you really have a, if you're really honest with yourself and you're really self-aware and you're really mindful, I don't think your self-love does become indulgent. Not at all. Not in an excessive way. And if you do, if you're having an imbalance and you're extreme in that way, it's because you're running from something. There's something you're not facing. And
Mm.
if there's something you're not facing, well, that's just your lesson. That's your path. And eventually it'll become clear. And
Mm.
who are we to judge, right?
Right.
Who are
Yeah.
we to judge?
I don't know. I did feel bad. I thought, oh, I've done all this work and now I'm feeling guilt and shame. Oh my gosh. Like, how
Right.
did I
But
get here?
but like you said, you've had struggled with that your whole
I
life.
have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
Okay.
like you never had, and you look at and with your parents, you never had permission to be yourself.
Right. Right.
You never had permission to be yourself or to express your feelings.
Right.
And that's why that was so powerful for you. And
Right.
to be honest, you were a mirror for all those people
Oh, because they were, in what way was I a mirror?
because they have the same stuff repressed. It
Oh.
just it just hasn't come out yet. If anybody judged you or criticized you, why? Because they judge and criticize themselves. Why? Because they were trained to get love and approval that way.
I get it. Okay, I get it. Okay. Interesting. Okay, so I interrupted you during your cycle, so you were
No, it's
talking.
fine.
Yeah.
No, no, it's perfect because this is real and that's what's going to help everybody. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think
because I've
it's
struggled with that too. I mean, I totally get it. This all
yeah.
comes from my pain too,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Well, so what I'm hearing is that there's this, it kind of starts, but you're saying what happens is that we miss because we're so focused on this, right? Because we're trying to, and you talk about this, um, what did you call it? A false meditation, false
Spiritual
bypass,
by
spiritual
spiritual bypassing.
right? Because I love
Yeah,
that idea. Because we're all in here, and we're actually not in here, because that's ultimately where all the action is, right? So that's where we last left. Tell me a little bit more about that.
well, it's the same thing that we've been talking about. We want to avoid the guilt, the fear, the insecurity, the shame, and the hurt.
Right.
So we just go back up here and we live in our mind and we say, I'll be happy if and when. I'll
Okay.
be at peace if and when. I'll be enlightened if and when. I will train my mind so well. And I know this because I did this. I trained my mind so well because I had to. And that's what gave me the strength of a container to finally let the emotions come out and process it. I finally made my mind clear and strong enough to process. But
Mm.
until that point, I had been using meditation and spiritual practice to repress the emotions and keep it down because I wasn't ready to deal with it.
I'm there too. Okay, that's my life story too. Because I really feel like it's really interesting. I think that sometimes spiritual practices can polarize us, right? We're against our emotions. We're into, we have all these things like negative emotions are bad, good emotions are good. We want to be peaceful and love and compassion, but then like we tamp this down, we tamp it down until it's this like thin, explosive layer of stuff that we have not resolved. And until you kind of go in there and open up the I don't know, it's probably Pandora's box until you open it
Absolutely.
up. You don't know what's in there, but then you also don't face it, and then you also don't face life, right? Because that's all part of life. All that icky stuff on the bottom of life is part of life. I don't know. That's at least what when I opened up that
Absolutely.
Pandora's box, it was just it just felt like chaos. But in a way, and it was like the most beautiful chaos that I can imagine because it was just chaos, but there's beauty in chaos, if that makes any sense. Um,
Absolutely. I agree.
yeah, but that's interesting that, and I think a lot of people do the spiritual bypass.
Yeah, we do, but and it's not negative. It's not, there's no judgment. That's not negative. It's just,
No,
we just don't have the support and we feel like we can't break down, like we have to survive. We have to get to work. We have to keep going, because this is the shattering of everything. I mean,
right,
what we're talking about for me brought me to my knees, to face the deepest parts of myself that I was rejecting and my deepest insecurities and my deepest fears of being completely alone, and underneath that was just sadness and pain and
mm,
so much sadness and pain.
mm-hmm,
That to the point where I had to pray to God or the universe to give me the strength to keep going every day.
mm-hmm. But
You
it's
know,
interesting because did you find like for me, I felt that same thing because during a meditation, I'm crying, I'm mad, I'm like having discursive thoughts. And then at one point, I just said, okay, I surrender. I surrender. I don't know what's happening, and I'm not going to try to tamp this down. I'm not going to try to like pack it down. I just am releasing all control. I surrender. Whatever is going to happen, happens, and I'm ready to let it rip.
yeah,
And I did, and that like on all sorts of like stuff. It was like an unleashing of all this stuff that was in there. And I think it's about being willing to surrender all those things and knowing that there's love all around you, that it will that love itself is healing. I think just I don't know what you found, but for me it just felt like the love, the presence around me was healing, and I didn't know it was there. And it wasn't with my parents or anything. It was just this eternal love that was there, but I didn't see it. But I had to surrender into it, if that makes sense.
100%.
Yeah. What
Yeah,
was your
100%.
what was your experience? Did you have something like when you released it, what gave you the faith that you could release the pain and the sadness and the part that you're like, I don't know if I can do this because I may just fall like I think all of us feel like we're going to fall in a deep dark hole and we're never going to crawl back out.
Well, I think because I've been in that place so many times, you get familiar with it. It's like, I love Florence Scovel Shinn's book about
Yeah.
the game of life and
Mhm.
how to play it. And I love she talks about seeing in the dark.
Mhm.
So like let's say you're in a room in your house that you've been in a lot of times. When you turn off the lights, you're gonna know where the furniture is, and you can kind of see in the dark. So by this time, by today, I mean, even today, I still struggle sometimes. I'm so familiar with that place that I know I just need to breathe
Mm,
and ask for strength and keep opening. And I know this too will pass, right? Because
mm-hmm.
everything changes and everything does. And I'm so versed in myself because I had to be to survive and to stay on the planet that, I'm just okay there now.
Yeah,
Even if I don't feel okay, I'm okay. And I know
right.
that, which is
Because you know
great.
that you'll come out of it. You
Exactly.
have faith because you've seen
And
it.
I know it's happening for a reason. Like the one thing that really keeps me going is, well, there's two things is that, when I'm not suffering and I get to enjoy my life and enjoy a cup of coffee or a conversation or an amazing interview or making love or
Mm-hmm.
a good meal or whatever it is that just makes me feel so alive and so grateful to be alive, that keeps me going. And then it's when someone I meet in person or someone sends me an email and says, your book has changed my life, or that interview
Mm,
changed my life, or I finally felt understood for the first time in my life. That feedback keeps me going too. And
mm-hmm.
so, like, it's like I now know that my suffering serves a purpose for everybody else, having helped
Yeah.
thousands of people now. And so it keeps going. So, it's like it's interesting. The thing that inspired me to write my book was when I heard the words, once I love myself unconditionally, loving another becomes an act of self-love.
Mm-hmm.
And so because I have learned how to love myself unconditionally, I do know that when I get to that point and I, am struggling or it's dark or it's painful or I'm praying to God or the universe for the strength to keep going, that the love that comes through, the wisdom that comes through is not just for my own pleasure and enjoyment and
Mm-hmm.
and and being okay, but for everybody else now. And that
Mm.
self-love is extending now to a
Yeah,
lot of people.
beautiful.
And to actually put that into place, and to feel it and experience it as it's happening. So I think as you know, it doesn't matter how much we heal, we're tested every day. So it doesn't matter how great I love myself today. Tomorrow, somebody's going to ask me to do something, and I have to say yes or no based on my truth. And
Mm-hmm.
tomorrow, I'm going to feel something, and I'm either going to express it or I'm going to internalize it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're always tested. You know,
Mm.
I'm always tested.
Mm. That is just what a beautiful soul you are. My goodness,
Well,
I'm
so
touched.
so are you. We obviously met at the right time.
We did. We did. All right. I want to, for folks that want to go to your website, because you have a bunch of different presentations that are coming up. I know you have one coming up soon on March 4th and 6th. You're going to be in Colorado doing a weekend retreat, but you have a whole bunch of other stuff. I went to your website, like a dozen different places, London, or England, and Australia, and Chicago, and Colorado, California. You're all over the place, and you can get information on going to your retreats. And what happens during a retreat? Is it conversations, experiences? What happens during a retreat?
Well, I'm in Los Angeles at the moment, and I'll be going to Colorado on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And the retreat is at a Buddhist retreat center. I'm not a Buddhist, but
Yeah.
the Buddhist retreat center is very much connected to the path I was on for many years. Um, and the retreat is called Beyond Suffering. And what we talk about are the keys to loving yourself unconditionally in your life now. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you can learn to love yourself now in every situation, every moment, that heals the past
Mm.
and it heals the future.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're in that, like we were talking about, when we're in the fully present state and we're not saying I'll love myself in the future, but we're actually doing it right now in the present moment, it blows open all those patterns that carry forward the conditional love, and then we
Mm.
move forward in our life with more authenticity and acceptance and honesty and kindness and compassion. And so we really focus on practically how to apply that to our life today now. So we'll do that throughout the weekend. And then I teach meditation. So I help people to train their mind to be
Mm-hmm.
in the present moment so they can actually acknowledge everything that's inside of them,
Mm-hmm.
and then also find the source of peace and love underneath their thoughts and underneath their
Mm.
emotions and underneath the guilt and insecurity
Right.
that's always there. That fountain is
Right.
always there. But, it can be hard sometimes if we don't have proper guidance or a good environment to find that source. So I,
Right.
I help guests to find that. And I also teach Qigong. And I teach a form of Qigong that very effectively unlocks stuck blood, stuck energy, and stuck emotion. And that's what
Mm.
causes depression and disease is stuck energy, stuck emotion, and stuck blood.
Interesting. And of course, there's this book
Yes.
that
Yes.
contains 30 chapters of ideas, affirmations, and practices that you can do. And it's all at unconditional selflove.com.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. I would love your support in any way by giving me comments below or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.